A column of armored men stretches beyond sight, their footsteps pounding the earth in perfect unison. This is not a scene from a battlefield, but from a Roman road, the true engine of conquest. How did an empire command its legions to cross mountains and rivers, appearing with shocking speed thousands of miles from home? The answer lies not in magic, but in a forgotten science of movement. By the end of this, you will understand the precise engineering and brutal discipline that turned marching into a world-conquering weapon. We are going to uncover how a single soldier carried a small fortress on his back, why an army built a walled town each night, and what secret kept them moving when others would collapse. What does it truly take to make an empire march? Their speed began with stone. Before a single soldier could take a step, Rome had to conquer the land itself, not with swords, but with shovels and meticulous geometry. The legendary Roman road was far more than a dirt path. It was a multi-layered engineering marvel, a permanent solution to the problem of mud, distance, and time. Imagine a cross-section of one of these highways. At its base, workers dug a deep trench, then filled it with a foundation of large stones, packed tightly. On top of this, they added a middle layer of smaller gravel mixed with sand, creating a stable draining platform. The final surface was a fitted pavement of hard, flat stones, often capped with a slight convex curve, what engineers call a camber. This gentle arch was a stroke of genius. When rain fell, it would run off the sides into drainage ditches, keeping the marching surface firm and dry while the world around it turned to swamp. A legion slogging through mud moves at a crawl. A legion marching on a stone highway, rain or shine, moves with the relentless pace of a machine. But the genius did not stop there. Roman surveyors, using simple but incredibly precise tools like the groma for sighting straight lines, plotted these roads across the landscape with an almost stubborn directness. They went over hills through valleys in breathtakingly straight segments. This wasn't just for show. A straight road is the shortest possible distance between 2 points. It saves time, it saves energy, and for an army carrying 60 pounds of gear, every unnecessary step is a step toward exhaustion. This network became the empire's central nervous system. From the cobble streets of Rome itself, these stone arteries stretched to the damp frontiers of Britannia, the sun-baked deserts of Syria, and the forested banks of the Danube. Over 250,000 miles of engineered road, that is a distance long enough to circle our planet 10 times. A messenger, changing horses at relay stations, could cover 100 miles in a single day. A legion marching in formation could reliably cover 15 to 20 miles daily, fully loaded, arriving ready to fight. The road was the first and most critical military secret. It turned the vast, chaotic geography of an empire into a predictable, manageable grid. It meant that the distance between a rebellion in Gaul and the iron-shod boots of the legions was not measured in miles, but in days. And on that stone foundation, the soldier's own burden began. That stone road was only the first challenge. The second, far greater test was carried on the shoulders of every single man. A Roman legionary was not just a fighter, he was a mobile, self-sufficient fortress. His true weapon was not merely his sword, but everything he could carry. Historians estimate his total load at between 60 and 100 pounds. To understand that weight, picture carrying a full suitcase, a heavy backpack, and holding a large shield, all while wearing metal armor for 20 miles under a Mediterranean sun. This was his daily reality. The iconic items are well known. The segmented plate armor, called the lorica segmentata, was a masterpiece of flexible protection. His large curved rectangular shield, the scutum, was a wall of wood and leather. He carried 2 throwing javelins, the pilum, designed to bend on impact and cripple an enemy shield, and his short, lethal stabbing sword, the gladius, rested at his hip. But the true secret of his endurance lay in the less glamorous gear. Each man carried a heavy leather sack containing an entrenching tool, a pickaxe, a saw, a basket for moving earth, and a thick wooden stake. He carried a mess kit, a water skin, and several days of hard rations, usually wheat or barley that he would grind and cook himself. This was not random baggage. It was a meticulously calculated survival system. The key to managing this immense burden was a simple, brilliant piece of equipment, the furca. This was a T-shaped pole made of sturdy wood. The legionary would hang his pack, his shield, and often his tools from the crossbar of this pole, then hoist the entire assembly onto his shoulder. This design did more than just make the load carryable. It balanced the weight centrally over his body, freeing both hands for marching and allowing him to swing the load from one shoulder to the other during the long march to fight fatigue. The Furka transformed the soldier from a beast of burden into an efficient porter. Every item had a purpose, and every pound was a calculated investment. The stake was for the knightly fortress, the tools were for building roads and siege works, the rations kept him fed without relying on vulnerable supply trains. This incredible load meant that wherever a legionary stopped, he had everything needed to build, to eat, and to fight. He was not just part of an army. He was a single, durable piece of a machine that could construct a walled camp each night, anywhere in the world. But how did they turn this burden of gear into a precise, unstoppable rhythm? Carrying that incredible weight was one thing, moving it in unison was another. The Roman legion perfected a specific, regulated walking rhythm known as the militaris gradus, the military step. This was not a casual stroll. It was a measured, efficient pace designed to conserve energy over impossible distances. Each stride was standardized at roughly 30 inches, about the length of a modern yardstick. At this precise length, marching to the beat of a centurion's cadence, a legion could maintain a steady speed of about 4 miles per hour. Now a modern hiker on a trail might cover that ground easily, but remember the context. This was not a person in lightweight gear on a day hike. This was thousands of men, each bearing up to 100 pounds of metal, wood, and leather, moving as a single sprawling entity across unpaved terrain for hours on end. The standard summer march lasted 5 hours, typically beginning at dawn to avoid the worst heat. At the military step, this translated to a reliable daily distance of around 18 to 20 Roman miles, which is about 16.5 to 18.5 of our modern miles. This consistency was the true miracle. It turned the chaotic variable of an army's movement into a predictable calculation for generals. They could look at a map, count the miles to a rebellious province, and know almost to the day when their iron discipline would arrive at the enemy's gates. But the military step was just the standard gear. When urgency demanded it, the legion could shift into a higher tempo, the plenus gradus or full step. This was a forced march, a grueling increase in pace and often in daily hours. Pushing with this intensified effort, a legion could cover 24 miles or more in a single day, a staggering feat for a fully laden force. This ability to switch between a relentless cruising speed and a punishing sprint gave Roman commanders a devastating tactical flexibility. An enemy might believe a legion was 5 days away, only to find its fortified camp appearing on the horizon in 3. Yet even this brutal pace had its limits, dictated not by will, but by a simple, universal human need. The relentless rhythm of the march had a breaking point. When a crisis erupted, that steady, grinding pace was not enough. The legion would then shift into its most punishing gear, the magnum iter, the great journey or forced march. This was where the machine of men was pushed to its absolute limit, transforming a disciplined column into an instrument of shocking, strategic surprise. Distances that would take a normal army a week could be devoured in a handful of desperate days. A legendary example is Julius Caesar's campaign against the Helvetii. Facing a massive tribal migration threatening Roman territory, Caesar ordered his legions on a series of brutal forced marches. In one staggering push, his men covered over 50 Roman miles in a single day, a distance of roughly 46 modern miles, while still carrying their full kit and preparing for immediate battle. To grasp that scale, picture a loaded soldier starting at the edge of a major city at dawn and arriving at the city center on the opposite side by nightfall, without stopping. It was a feat that bordered on the superhuman, and it allowed Caesar to intercept and decisively engage an enemy who believed themselves safely out of reach. The cost of such speed was written on the bodies of the men. Every extra mile was paid for in blistered feet, searing muscle pain, and sheer exhaustion. The standard load, manageable over 18 miles, became an agonizing burden over 30. Soldiers would collapse by the roadside, only to be roused by their centurions or loaded onto the baggage carts. Dehydration and heat stroke were constant threats. Maintaining cohesion during these trials fell entirely on the officers, particularly the centurions. These veteran leaders, the backbone of the legion, marched alongside their men, sharing the hardship. They were not distant commanders, but hands-on disciplinarians and motivators, using a mix of encouragement, threat, and raw personal example to keep the column moving. They understood that morale was as critical as muscle. A forced march that shattered the spirit of the legion was a strategic defeat, no matter the miles covered. The decision to order a magnum iter was therefore a grave gamble for any general. He was trading the immediate fighting strength of his men for positional advantage, betting that arriving exhausted at the right place and time was better than arriving fresh, but too late. It was the ultimate expression of Roman military philosophy, where the human body and spirit were calculated resources in a vast logistical equation. This relentless motion, however, always had one non-negotiable destination. No matter how far or how fast they had pushed, every single day ended with the same ritual. That final destination was never left to chance. While the main column marched in its thunderous rhythm, the army's true security and direction depended on men moving in silence, far ahead on the horizon. These were the explorators, the scouts, and the speculators, the spies, the eyes and ears of the legion. While the army was a battering ram of force, these men were its delicate, probing fingers, feeling out the path ahead and ensuring the colossal machine behind them never marched blindly into a trap. Their mission was simple and critical: find the safest route, locate fresh water, and most importantly, discover the enemy before the enemy discovered Rome. They were often auxiliary cavalry, recruited from frontier tribes who knew the local land and could move with swift native familiarity. Riding light and fast, they would fan out miles ahead of the vanguard, scanning the landscape not for its beauty, but for its threats and opportunities. A distant dust cloud could signal an enemy force, an oddly quiet forest might hide an ambush, a changed watercourse could ruin the entire day's planned route. Every piece of intelligence, from the mood of local villagers to the quality of a grazing field, was filtered back to the commanding officers, allowing them to adjust the army's course in real time. But how did these scouts know where to go in the first place? In a world without satellites or topographic surveys, they relied on a combination of crude technology and sharp observation. Roman military planners used itineraria, practical route maps that were less about geographical accuracy and more about a list of instructions. Think of them as the ancient world's turn-by-turn navigation. An itinerarium might state, follow the Via Appia for 100 miles to the town of Capua, then take the left fork at the stone marker of Mercury for 30 miles to the river crossing. Distance was measured in paces and time, not abstract space. For on-the-ground precision, the scouts and the army surveyors used the groma, that simple but brilliant tool for sighting straight lines. By aligning poles in the distance, they could plot a direct path across open country or extend the line of a road under construction, yet technology had its limits. In deep, unfamiliar territory, the scouts became masters of natural navigation. They read the sun's arc, noted the flow of rivers toward larger settlements, and memorized distinctive landmarks: a peculiarly shaped mountain, an ancient gnarled tree, a rock formation that looked like a face. These became the signposts of the wilderness, the success of the entire march. The difference between a secure camp and a disastrous ambush rested on the skill of these forward troops. They transformed the unknown, often hostile landscape ahead from a realm of fear and mystery into a known quantity, a series of calculated risks and confirmed resources. Because of them, the general could make his daily decree with confidence, telling the vast machine behind him exactly how far to push, where to turn, and where to stop. And that stopping point was never just an empty field. The intelligence brought back by the scouts determined more than just the route. It decided the army's final safety. As the sun began its descent, the relentless forward motion of the legion ceased and a different kind of precision took over. The order to halt did not mean rest. It signaled the start of a race against darkness, a daily ritual where thousands of exhausted men would transform an empty field into a fortified town before the first stars appeared. This was the construction of the marching camp, the castra, and it was the non-negotiable conclusion to every single day on the march, a testament to discipline so ingrained it became instinct. The moment the designated site was reached, usually a flat area with good drainage and a nearby water source, the entire machine shifted into a well-rehearsed routine. No time was wasted. Surveyors using their grommy immediately laid out the camp's blueprint on the ground. The design was always the same, a perfect rectangle or square with its dimensions calculated based on the size of the force. This standardization was its greatest strength. Every soldier, from a fresh recruit to a grizzled veteran, knew exactly where he needed to be and what he needed to do, no matter if they were in Gaul or Syria. The perimeter was marked with flags outlining the future protective ditch and wall. Then the work began in earnest. Every man had a specific pre-assigned task. A large contingent, perhaps a full cohort, formed a protective screen around the site, standing guard with shields and javelins, while the others toiled. The rest of the legionaries dropped their marching packs and picked up their entrenching tools. The first and most critical job was digging the fossa, the defensive ditch. This was no shallow trench. Specifications called for it to be at least 3 feet deep and 5 feet wide. The excavated earth was piled inward to form the agger, the rampart wall. Into this earthen bank, the soldiers planted the sharpened wooden stakes each man carried on his march, creating a formidable palisade. Think of the sheer volume of earth moved. With several thousand men digging in unison, the perimeter trench of an entire fortress would rise from the ground in a matter of 2 to 3 hours. While the walls went up, the interior took shape with equal efficiency. The surveyors' lines dictated the layout of a miniature city within. 2 main streets, the Via Praetoria and the Via Principalis, crossed at the center, leading to the 4 precisely positioned gates. Along these streets, the tents of the legions, the officers, and the commander were erected in perfectly ordered rows. The cavalry stables, the hospital, the workshops, all had their designated place. This meticulous order served a deadly practical purpose. In the chaos of a night attack, every soldier could find his way to the wall in total darkness, and every unit knew exactly which section it was responsible for defending. There were no blind alleys, no confusing courtyards, only a grid designed for rapid military response. By the time the last stake was set, the transformation was complete. Where there had been nothing but open field at dusk, now stood a walled fortress, complete with sentry patrols on the ramparts and cooking fires flickering in the ordered lanes below. This daily act of creation provided more than just security from enemy raids. It provided profound psychological stability. In the vast, unpredictable frontier, the legionary could end each grueling day within the familiar, defensible walls of a Roman camp. He ate his ration of porridge, tended to his blistered feet, and slept not as a man lost in the wilderness, but as a citizen of a portable, indomitable Rome. This fortress, however, was only as strong as the bodies that built it, and those bodies required a fuel more constant than grain, a resource that could halt an entire army in its tracks. That nightly fortress needed constant feeding. Behind the disciplined ranks of legionaries stretched a second, sprawling army that never fought a battle, the impedimenta, the baggage train. This was the logistical tale, a chaotic, vital caravan of carts, mules, and thousands of non-combatants that turned the legion from a fighting force into a mobile society. Without it, the war machine would grind to a halt within days. The impedimenta carried everything the legion could not immediately carry on its back. Think of massive ox-drawn carts groaning under the weight of disassembled siege engines, the ballistae and catapults that could reduce city walls. There were spare weapons and armor, the blacksmith's forge, the paymaster's strongbox, and the commander's elaborate leather tent, a portable headquarters complete with folding furniture. Crucially, it also included the medical corps with its supplies of bandages, surgical tools, and herbs, the difference between a wounded soldier recovering or dying in the field. Then came the camp followers, a small city on the move, wives, children, merchants, sutlers selling wine and extra food, and skilled craftsmen like carpenters and leatherworkers. This immense convoy moved slower than the main legion, often following a day behind, protected by lighter auxiliary troops. Its security was as vital as the front line, for a captured or destroyed baggage train meant the end of a campaign. But the most relentless challenge, the true arithmetic of conquest, was not moving the gear but fueling the men. A single legion of over 5,000 soldiers consumed a mountain of food every single day. The standard ration was wheat, about 2 pounds per man. Do the math, that is over 5 tons of grain consumed daily by one legion just for basic sustenance. This created an impossible burden. No baggage train could carry months of supplies for such a vast appetite. The solution was a systematic, often brutal practice called fermentatio, foraging. Special detachments would fan out from the line of march, not as scouts but as harvesters. They would requisition or simply take grain from local farms and storehouses, buying it when possible, seizing it when necessary. This turned the land itself into a rolling larder, but it was a dangerous double-edged sword. It allowed the army to move fast and light, but it also made them dependent on the fertility and goodwill of the territory they passed through. A barren region or a population that burned its own crops ahead of the advancing legions could spell disaster. This is where the grand Roman infrastructure proved its worth beyond mere movement. Those stone roads allowed supply wagons from distant provinces to reach the front with reliable speed. Even more critical was control of the sea and navigable rivers. A grain ship sailing from Egypt to a port in Greece could carry more food, faster and cheaper, than 1,000 mule carts stumbling over mountain passes. Secure supply lines stretching back to the fertile heartlands of the empire were the invisible threads that held the entire campaign together. A legion could march on its own feet, but it could only eat if Rome's vast logistical network kept the grain flowing. The general's genius was not just in winning battles, but in solving this endless equation of hunger and distance, ensuring that when his ironclad column finally met the enemy, his men were not just positioned to fight, but fully fed and ready to win. The army's logistical lifeline was its greatest vulnerability, a slow-moving target that nature itself could sever with a single swollen river or a dense, trackless forest. This is where the legion's hidden weapon revealed itself, not in the front ranks, but among the specialists who marched with saws and axes. Every legion contained a corps of skilled engineers, the immunes and fabri, men excused from routine guard duty because their expertise was too valuable to waste. They were the pioneers of the march, the problem solvers who turned impossible terrain into a highway for conquest. When the scouts reported a river too deep to ford, blocking the army's path, the fabri went to work. They did not wait for local guides or search for a distant crossing. Their job was to impose Rome's will upon the geography itself. For smaller rivers, they might construct a ford, methodically filling the bed with stones and gravel to create a firm, shallow passage for thousands of marching feet. But for major obstacles, they deployed a masterpiece of military engineering, the prefabricated bridge. The Roman army traveled with the components for these bridges, just as it traveled with siege engines. They carried heavy timber, pre-cut and shaped, along with iron spikes, ropes, and specialized tools. Upon reaching the riverbank, the engineers would launch small boats to anchor a line across the current. Working with the speed of a practiced assembly line, soldiers would then construct a floating pontoon bridge using boats and lash together rafts as supports, or drive wooden piles into the riverbed to create a more permanent pond. The speed of this construction was breathtaking. Julius Caesar's famed bridge across the Rhine, a trestle bridge over 1,000 feet long, was built by his legions in just 10 days, a statement of power meant to all the Germanic tribes. For the marching column, however, the bridges built on campaign were simpler, faster, and just as vital. A river that would have delayed an army for weeks could be crossed in a single afternoon, the relentless schedule of the march preserved. Forests presented a different, more grueling challenge. A dense woodland could swallow an army whole, breaking its formation and slowing it to a crawl. Here the engineers acted as clearers, their axes rising and falling in a steady rhythm ahead of the vanguard. They did not just cut a path, they surveyed and cleared a standardized width, often wide enough for several men to march abreast or for supply carts to pass. They removed fallen logs, filled in muddy hollows, and marked the route. In mountainous regions, their task became even more dramatic. When a cliff face or a steep slope blocked the predetermined straight line of the road, the fabri would carve a passage directly into the stone. Using pickaxes, levers, and fire-setting techniques where they heated the rock with fire and then doused it with water to make it crack, they would cut ledges and galleries into the mountainside. You can still see these scars of conquest today in places like the Alps, where narrow Roman roads cling to the sides of cliffs, a testament to the refusal of the legion to be diverted. These engineers were the unsung architects of momentum. While the infantry provided the brute force of the empire, The immunes provided its flexibility. They ensured that no river, forest, or mountain was ever a final answer, only a temporary puzzle to be solved. Their work meant that the enemy's most trusted ally, the rugged land itself, could be neutralized. A tribe hiding behind a fast-flowing river would watch in disbelief as a Roman bridge materialized as if by magic. A people sheltered by ancient woods would hear the relentless sound of axes growing closer each day, the trees that had protected them for generations falling in rows before the empire's advance. This relentless capacity to overcome the environment made the Roman war machine not just powerful, but psychologically unstoppable. What good were natural defenses against an enemy who simply rebuilt the world to suit his march? A legion on the march was a living, breathing organism spanning miles, and its nervous system was sound. In the deafening noise of thousands of marching feet, clattering gear, and creaking carts, shouted orders were useless beyond a few paces. Coordination across this vast human machine relied on a precise language of bronze and cloth. The Roman military developed an elaborate system of acoustic and visual signals, a code that every soldier from recruit to commander understood instinctively. The primary instruments were trumpets, each with a distinct shape and purpose. The long, straight tuba issued clear, piercing calls for specific watch changes and ceremonial functions. The curved cornu, shaped like a capital G, was the voice of the century and the maniple, its deeper tone cutting through battlefield din to order tactical movements. And the compact bucina, often carried by junior officers, regulated the daily rhythm of camp life, sounding the watches through the night. On the march, these instruments became the heartbeat of the column. A specific series of notes from the cornu would command the entire vanguard to halt. A different call would signal the rear guard to close the distance. The call to form a defensive square against cavalry, to change direction, or to prepare for an imminent ambush, all were communicated not by a runner who might be too late, but by a sound that traveled at the speed of air, reaching every ear almost simultaneously. This allowed for instantaneous collective reaction. Imagine the sudden blare of alarm trumpets echoing down the line. Within seconds, thousands of men would stop, drop their marching packs, and form a bristling perimeter, shields locked facing outward, transforming from a vulnerable column into a fortified hedgehog. But sound had its limits in high winds, dense fog, or the sheer cacophony of a chaotic retreat. For these moments, the army had a silent language of sight. At the front of each century, a standard bearer, the signifer, carried the unit's sacred standard, the signum. This was not merely a flag, it was a gilded symbol of the century's identity and honor, topped with an open hand or other emblems, and often decorated with discs representing past honors. In battle and on the march, the signum was the physical focal point for every man in the unit. Where it went, they followed. If the standard began to veer to the left, the entire century adjusted its path without a single word. If it was planted firmly in the ground, it was a rallying point, a place to stand and fight. Losing the standard to the enemy was the ultimate disgrace, a spiritual blow to the unit's very soul. Complementing the standards were the centurions themselves, the human transmitters of command. Through a system of hand signals and gestures, they could convey complex orders silently. A raised arm might mean prepare to halt. A sweeping motion across the chest could signal a change in formation depth. Their vine staff, the symbol of their rank, became a pointing instrument, directing men to fill gaps or reinforce a flank. This layered system created incredible resilience. If the trumpet call was drowned out, men watched their standard. If dust obscured the standard, they looked to their centurion's arm. It was a network of communication with built-in redundancy, ensuring that even in the fog of war, the machine retained its cohesion. The true test of this system, however, came not during the orderly march, but at the moment of ultimate transition, when the column had to stop its forward motion and become something else entirely. The blare of the trumpet and the position of the standard dictated more than just stopping and starting. They orchestrated the very shape of the moving army itself. The Roman legion did not march in a single massive crowd that would have been a recipe for chaos and slaughter. Instead, it moved in precise, tactical formations designed for the terrain and the threat level, a flowing geometry of men and steel. The most basic formation was the agmen, simply the column or the marching order, but even this had critical variations. When moving through confined, safe spaces like a narrow mountain pass or along a causeway, the army would adopt a long, thin column, a single file of centuries stretched out like beads on a string. This was efficient for movement but terribly vulnerable. An attack on such a formation could cut the army in half, isolating the vanguard from the rear. So the moment the scouts reported open ground with potential enemy contact, the entire machine would reconfigure into something far more formidable, the agmen quadratum, the square column. Picture this not as a solid block but as a hollow rectangle of marching men. The legions themselves formed the walls of this moving box. They marched not in a single line, but in their battle formations, several men deep, facing outward from the column. The inside of this hollow square was reserved for the most precious and vulnerable elements: the baggage train, the siege engines, the camp followers, and the command staff. This was a stroke of pure tactical genius. It turned the army's greatest liability, its slow, cumbersome supplies, into a protected core, while transforming the entire marching force into a ready-made defensive perimeter. The agmen quadratum was always prepared for an ambush. At the first sign of attack, perhaps a sudden cavalry charge from the tree line, the trumpets would sound a specific call. The outer ranks of the column would immediately halt, plant their shields into the earth, and level their javelins, creating an instant wall of wood and iron. The inner ranks could then support them or prepare to rotate into the front line. The baggage animals and non-combatants in the center were kept under control, preventing a panic that could break the formation from within. In moments, a marching column became a fortified camp on the move, a bristling square that presented a shield wall to enemies on every side. The positioning of units within this square was also carefully calculated. The most experienced legions, the veteran cohorts, typically took the front, the primum agmen, and the rear, the novissimum agmen, the positions most likely to bear the brunt of a head-on or pursuing attack. The newer legions or auxiliary troops manned the flanks. This arrangement meant that no matter the direction of the threat, the hardest and most disciplined soldiers would face it first. This constant fluid dance between movement and readiness, between the narrow agmen and the fortified square, was the ultimate expression of Roman military mindset. They refused to ever be caught completely unprepared. Every mile covered was a mile spent in a state of controlled, watchful tension, where the act of traveling itself was a continuous drill for battle. The enemy lurking in the hills would see not a disjointed line of vulnerable travelers, but a single armored organism that seemed to have no weak points, an entity that could snap from a march into a fortress with a single, unified breath. This seamless transition from road to rampart was the final, crushing advantage, proving that for Rome, the journey and the battle were not separate events, but two phases of the same, inexorable conquest. Flanking the great square of infantry moved a different kind of soldier, lighter, faster, and perpetually scanning the horizon. This was the cavalry screen, the living, breathing shield of the legion. While the heavy infantry formed the armored body of the marching army, the equites and their auxiliary counterparts were its eyes and swift, striking hands. Their primary duty was not to join the main battle line in a headlong charge, at least not initially, but to create a zone of security around the entire cumbersome force. They operated in small, agile troops, fanning out along the flanks of the column, sometimes riding miles ahead or behind. Think of them as a moving perimeter fence, one made of men and horses rather than wood. Their mission was to intercept any threat long before it could reach the precious baggage train or disrupt the marching ranks. An enemy raiding party hoping to pick off stragglers or stampede the supply mules would first have to slip past these vigilant horsemen. A local scout trying to gauge the legion's strength and direction would find himself chased off or captured by these mobile patrols. By dominating the space around the army, the cavalry denied the enemy information and the element of surprise, turning the landscape from a place of hidden danger into a controlled, monitored space. This mobile screen was especially critical during the army's most vulnerable moments, when fording a river or navigating a narrow defile. While the infantry was bottlenecked and disordered, the cavalry would intensify their patrols, forming a protective cordon to hold any opportunistic attackers at bay. Their value, however, went far beyond simple guard duty. These horsemen were the legion's primary source of tactical intelligence. We already met the explorators, the scouts, who were often drawn from these very auxiliary cavalry units. Riding far in advance, they probed potential routes, located enemy encampments, and assessed the morale of local populations. The report from a cavalry patrol could mean the difference between the army taking a safe, open route or marching straight into a prepared ambush. They provide the general with a real-time picture of the world beyond the next hill, and when battle was finally joined, their role transformed. After the legion's infantry had shattered the enemy's main line with its disciplined pressure, the cavalry's moment arrived. Trumpets would sound a specific call, and the horsemen, held in reserve until now, would launch in pursuit. This was not about heroic single combat, it was about systematic annihilation. Their job was to run down fleeing warriors, prevent the enemy from regrouping, and turn a tactical victory into a complete, demoralizing rout. A broken army could scatter and live to fight another day, but an army chased for miles by cavalry was often destroyed as a fighting force forever. In this way, the cavalry extended the legion's reach far beyond the throw of a javelin. They expanded its sensory perception on the march and multiplied its lethal impact after the battle. They ensured that the relentless machine of the legion was not just powerful, but also perceptive and utterly inescapable. The cavalry ensured the army's safety, but an invisible enemy was always marching beside them. For every soldier felled by a sword, far more were lost to sickness, dysentery, and contaminated water. A legion's true strength was measured not just in fighting men, but in healthy ones, and Rome developed a sophisticated, if brutal, science of marching medicine to protect its most valuable asset, the soldier's body. This began with the most critical resource, water. A thirsty army is a paralyzed army, but a drinking army can be a dying one. Roman military regulations were famously strict on this point. When a column halted near a stream or river, water details were sent not to the nearest bank, but upstream. They were to draw water from a point above where the army and its animals would gather, a simple but profound rule to avoid the filth and waste the massive force produced. Even with this precaution, the water was rarely trusted. The legionary's constant companion was his pasca, a drink so common it was a symbol of the soldier's life. This was not fine wine, but a mixture of sour wine vinegar, water, and sometimes herbs. The acetic acid in the vinegar acted as a mild disinfectant, killing some bacteria in questionable water sources. Beyond its sanitary role, pasca was a practical marvel. It quenched thirst effectively, provided a small caloric boost, and its electrolytes helped stave off cramps during long marches under the sun. Every soldier carried a supply, making his own canteen a tiny field hospital. When injury or illness did strike, the army had a system to cope. Each legion traveled with a corps of medics, the medici, and a valetudinarium, a field hospital set up within the nightly camp. These were not doctors in our modern sense, but practical surgeons and herbalists whose knowledge was born of grim experience. They could set broken bones, extract arrowheads, and suture wounds using techniques and tools that would remain standard for centuries. They used honey as an antibacterial salve, applied spider webs to staunch bleeding, and utilized a variety of herbal poultices. Survival rates were low by today's standards, but the very existence of an organized medical corps gave a wounded soldier a fighting chance he would not have had in almost any other ancient army. Perhaps the most telling sign of Roman logistical foresight, however, was found in the latrine. The marching camp always included carefully placed, deep trench latrines, situated downstream and downwind from the main living and cooking areas. Their use was mandatory, enforced by centurions. This was not about comfort, it was a desperate battle against camp fever. The concentration of thousands of men and animals in one place was a petri dish for disease, with dysentery and typhus being constant, silent killers. To combat this, the army practiced a ruthless policy of movement. A marching camp was used for one night and one night only. The next day, the legion would move on, leaving its waste and any incubating sickness behind in the abandoned ditches. This constant relocation was a strategic decision as vital as any battle plan. It broke the cycle of infection, ensuring that an army did not slowly poison itself on its own filth. Historians estimate that disease and infection claimed more legionaries than enemy blades ever did. The entire medical and sanitary regime, from the vinegar drink to the strict latrine discipline, was a calculated war against this statistical reality. It acknowledged that the greatest threat to the empire's reach was not a foreign army, but the fragile biology of the men who enforced it. Every regulation, every sip of pasca, every freshly dug trench was a line of defense in that war, preserving the fighting strength of the legion mile after grueling mile. The final, most devastating weapon of the Roman march was not carried in a pack or sounded by a trumpet. It was an atmosphere, a crushing sense of inevitability projected by the machine itself. Long before combat, the empire waged a silent war on the minds of its foes. To witness a full legion on the move was to witness a force of nature made of men. From a distant hill, an observing scout would first see the dust cloud, a vast, low-hanging smear on the horizon that spoke of impossible numbers. Then came the sound, a deep, rhythmic thunder felt in the chest before it was heard by the ears, the synchronized tramp of thousands of hobnailed sandals striking the stone road in perfect time. As the column drew nearer, the details would crystallize into a terrifying spectacle. The sun flashed off a sea of polished iron armor, a rippling river of metal that seemed to have no end. Above the ranks, the gilded eagles and ornate standards of the legion stood tall, catching the light, symbols of an institution that outlived any single man. The silence from within the ranks was as frightening as the noise of their approach. There were no shouts, no chaotic cries, only the low murmur of centurions' commands and the relentless, grinding cadence of the step. This was not a horde, it was order incarnate, a display of power so disciplined it felt inhuman. For a local tribe watching this spectacle approach their lands, the psychological impact was profound. Their own warriors were brave individuals, bound by personal loyalty and the heat of the moment. What they saw advancing toward them was the opposite, a single entity that had erased individual will. The precision of the movement suggested a chilling control, a total mastery of men that implied a similar mastery of battle. The sheer logistical spectacle, the endless baggage train, the organized cavalry screen, the fact that this army could build a fortified town each night sent a clear, demoralizing message. These men were not passing through, they were bringing their entire world with them, and they intended to stay. This psychological dominance was a deliberate command strategy. Roman generals understood that the best victory was one achieved without costly fighting. The awe-inspiring parade of the march was a form of theater, a calculated demonstration meant to break an enemy's spirit before the first spear was thrown. Ambassadors from rival kingdoms, invited to observe legions on exercise or parade, would return home with stories of this iron discipline, stories that grew in the telling. The reputation became a weapon that marched ahead of the actual armies. A province might hear of the approach of a legion and, remembering the tales of its impossible order and relentless pace, choose negotiation over rebellion. The sight of that ordered column, the sound of that unified tread, communicated something simple and devastating. Resistance is futile. You are not fighting men, you are fighting a system, a machine that feels no fear, that knows no fatigue, and that will arrive at your gates exactly when it predicts, ready to build a walled camp on your finest farmland. This aura of inevitability was the ultimate triumph of the Roman military system. It turned the arduous, practical act of moving an army into a terrifying declaration of intent, proving that conquest could begin not with a battle cry, but with the steady, earth-shaking rhythm of 60,000 marching feet. The aura of Roman power was never a bluff, and its most brilliant test came not on a prepared battlefield, but on the dusty roads of Gaul. In the spring of 58 BC, Julius Caesar faced a crisis that threatened to unravel his new command before it began. An entire Celtic nation, the Helvetii, had decided to migrate west, burning their own villages to sever any thought of return. Their column was colossal, over 300,000 men, women, and children, a slow-moving tidal wave of humanity and livestock that would inevitably crash into Roman allied territories. Caesar had a single legion nearby, the 10th, with 3 more hastening from winter quarters. The Helvetii had a massive head start and were already on the move. This was the moment when marching doctrine transformed from theory into the art of the impossible. Caesar's first move was pure Roman calculus. He did not chase the migration directly. Instead, he marched his forces to the key river crossing the Helvetii. I needed to use the Rhone. Arriving first, he ordered his single legion and the local auxiliaries to build a 19-mile-long fortification of earth and timber along the riverbank in just 24 days. This was the marching camp principle scaled to a geographic choke point. When the Helvetii arrived, they found not an open ford, but a manned Roman wall blocking their path. Forced to seek another route, they played into Caesar's hands, giving his other legions precious time to assemble. Now the real chase began. Caesar, with 4 legions united, shadowed the Helvetian migration, maintaining a distance of 5 to 6 miles. Each day, his scouts reported the enemy's direction. Each night, his men built a fortified castra, a secure base of operations from which he could observe and plan. The Helvetii, burdened by their families and wagons, moved like a vast, sprawling herd. The Romans, a compact engine of war, moved with the predatory efficiency we have detailed. The critical moment came when Caesar's grain supply, dependent on foraging in a land already picked clean by the migrants, ran dangerously low. He broke off to resupply at a nearby allied town. Seizing this as their chance, the Helvetii suddenly turned and attacked the Roman rear guard, a single legion. What followed was a masterpiece of forced march response. Hearing of the attack, Caesar did not order a cautious advance. He divided his force, sending his cavalry to relieve the immediate pressure, while he led 2 legions back to support the embattled rear guard and sent his remaining 2 legions to secure the high ground ahead of the enemy column. This was the magnum iter, the great journey, executed under the pressure of combat. Legions moved not as a single block, but as coordinated, independent jaws of a trap, covering brutal distances at speed to regain tactical position. The climax was a feat of endurance that entered legend. With his forces repositioned, Caesar needed to cut off the Helvetii's line of march definitively. He ordered his troops on a final, staggering forced march. His legions covered over 50 Roman miles in a single day, a distance of nearly 46 modern miles, to arrive at a hilltop fortress town called Bibracte ahead of the migrating tribe. Consider the reality of that number. These men in full armor and kit moved the distance of 2 full standard marches in one day after weeks of campaigning to seize the strategic high ground. When the exhausted Helvetii arrived, they found the Romans not behind them, but dug in and waiting before them, their knightly fortress already built on the chosen battlefield. The ensuing fight was hard, but the outcome was decided the moment the Roman ramparts appeared on that hill. Caesar had used every secret, the roads for initial positioning, the nightly fort for security, the scout network for intelligence, and the crushing, inhuman tempo of the forced march to negate the enemy's numbers and head start. He did not outfight the Helvetii first, he outmarched them. The entire campaign proved that against the Roman system, geography and time itself could become weapons for Rome and against everyone else. But that same system, when its principles were ignored or broken, could collapse with terrifying speed. The Teutoburg forest disaster of 9 AD stands as the starkest proof. Here the meticulous rules of the Roman march were violated, one by one, with catastrophic consequences. The commander was Publius Quinctilius Varus, a politician given military command, leading 3 veteran legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, deep into the unfamiliar forested territory of Germania. His mission was not conquest, but consolidation to impose Roman law and taxation on recently pacified tribes. He marched with the full apparatus of empire, legions, auxiliaries, and a long baggage train of camp followers, administrators, and their families, believing the land was securely under control. This was his first fatal mistake. He assumed the environment was friendly. A trusted Germanic auxiliary commander named Arminius, who had served in the Roman army, warned Varus of a minor uprising elsewhere. He advised the governor to divert from the main Roman military road and take a shortcut through the dense, pathless Teutoburg forest to crush the revolt quickly. Varus, trusting Arminius, agreed. He ordered his entire force off the secure, engineered route and into the trackless woods. The breakdown began immediately. The terrain was a nightmare of mud, thick undergrowth, and steep, slippery ravines. The Roman engineers, so adept at building roads, could not clear a path fast enough for the massive, slow-moving column. The disciplined agmen quadratum, the defensive square formation, became impossible to maintain. The column stretched out, thinning into a vulnerable, disjointed line miles long. Men, animals, and carts bunched up at choke points, creating chaos. The heavy rain that began to fall turned the forest floor into a bog, further slowing movement and breaking formation. Then came the second critical failure, reconnaissance. Local Germanic scouts, loyal to Arminius, fed Varus false information, while his own explorators either saw nothing in the dense woods or their warnings were dismissed by a commander who believed no threat existed. The Roman army was blind, marching deaf and dumb into a carefully prepared killing zone. The attack, when it came, was not a set-piece battle. It was a relentless, murderous harassment from the shadows. Germanic warriors who knew every route and gully emerged from the mist and trees, hurling javelins and unleashing volleys of arrows at the disorganized Roman mass. They would strike a section of the column, then melt back into the forest before a proper counterattack could form. The Romans, trained for open field combat and shield wall discipline, had no enemy line to close with. Their heavy armor and large shields became liabilities in the mud and tight spaces. They could not build a marching camp in the choked terrain. They could not form a coherent battle line. For 3 nightmarish days the slaughter continued. The rain never stopped. The column, now a panicked mob, tried to fight its way forward, only to find its path blocked by felled trees and earthworks built by the Germans. The baggage train was captured or destroyed, adding to the confusion. By the end, all 3 legions were annihilated. Some 15,000 to 20,000 Romans were killed, and the precious eagle standards were lost, an unthinkable disgrace. The disaster was not a military defeat in the traditional sense. It was the systematic dismantling of the Roman way of war. Every secret we have discussed was inverted. There was no secure road, only a hostile forest. There was no reliable intelligence, only deception. There was no maintained formation, only chaos. There was no fortified nightly camp, only exposed terror. Varus in his despair fell on his own sword. The ghost of those lost legions haunted Rome for generations, ending any dream of conquering Germania beyond the Rhine. The Teutoburg forest proved that the legion's power was not inherent in its soldiers or its swords, but in the rigid, intelligent system that moved them. Break that system and the invincible machine became a trapped, helpless beast. Teutoburg was a lesson in the cost of ignoring terrain. For the Roman legion, the environment was never just a backdrop. It was an active opponent to be studied, outmaneuvered, and defeated. Their true genius lay not in a single rigid doctrine, but in a flexible science of adaptation, bending their relentless machine to the will of mountains, deserts, and rivers. Each extreme environment demanded a different kind of marching intelligence. In the towering Alps, the legion faced a vertical maze of rock and ice. They did not avoid these passes, they mastered them, following ancient trade routes that snaked through the highest peaks. But these paths were traps as much as corridors. A narrow defile was a death sentence if an enemy held the heights above, able to rain down stones and javelins on the column below. The danger was not only human. Scouts listened for the telltale crack of snowpack, knowing a triggered avalanche could bury a century in an instant. Movement here was a cautious, deliberate ballet. Engineers went first, widening paths and cutting steps into sheer rock faces. The column would then compress, moving in single file or small groups, with advance parties securing each successive ridge before signaling the main force to follow. Speed was sacrificed for security, every upward step a calculated gamble against the mountain and whatever might be waiting at the crest. The desert presented a completely inverted hell, a vast horizontal oven where the enemy was the sun itself. Here, the precious rhythm of the military step had to bow to a more urgent tempo, the rhythm of water. A legion could carry only a few days' supply in skins and canteens. Beyond that, survival depended on knowing where the next source lay, often hidden in a landscape that offered no clues. This is where the speculators proved their worth beyond mere scouting. These agents, sometimes native guides recruited for their ancestral knowledge, became hunters of the invisible. They looked for the faintest signs, a certain type of green-tinged rock, the flight pattern of birds at dusk heading toward an unseen seep, or the subtle, cooler feel of air from a fissure that might lead to a subterranean spring. Finding and securing an oasis was a strategic objective as critical as capturing a city. The entire march would be plotted from water source to water source, a desperate dotted line across the blank map. The army would often march at night or in the pre-dawn coolness, resting during the scorching midday hours in whatever shade could be contrived. The heavy woolen cloak of the legionary, seemingly absurd in the heat, became a vital tool, soaked in water at a source and worn to provide evaporative cooling for miles. In the desert, logistics was not about grain, but about gallons, and a single failed reconnaissance could mean death by thirst for thousands. Between the mountain's choke point and the desert's emptiness flowed the third great challenge, the river. A watercourse was the ultimate strategic hurdle, a natural moat that could halt an army for weeks. The Roman response was a graduated scale of engineering solutions, each chosen for speed and circumstance. The simplest was the ford, but finding one was an art. Cavalry patrols would probe the banks, testing the depth and firmness of the bottom. A good ford was not just shallow, it had a solid, rocky bed that would not turn to sucking mud under the weight of men and carts. When no ford existed, the Fabry would sometimes build one, a temporary causeway of rubble and packed brush sunk into the riverbed. For major rivers, the true spectacle began, the pontoon bridge. This was the Legion's signature piece of logistical theater. Boats or large sealed barrels were brought forward on wagons, lashed together side by side across the current, and anchored with heavy ropes. Planking was then laid across this floating platform, creating a roadway wide enough for a column 8 men abreast. The entire structure, hundreds of feet long, could be assembled in a single day. The psychological impact was immense. To local tribes who saw rivers as gifts from the gods and natural borders, the sight of a Roman army walking across the water as if it were solid ground was a shocking demonstration of power. It communicated that no barrier, natural or divine, could stop this empire's advance. Each environment forced a different facet of the Roman system to the forefront, from the cautious scout in the mountains, to the water-divining spy in the desert, to the brilliant engineer at the riverbank. Their adaptability turned geography from a master into a tool, proving that the Legion could not only march on stone roads, but could write its own path across the very elements. Even the relentless day march had its shadowy counterpart, a gambit of pure risk and potential reward. When the sun vanished, the Roman Legion did not always rest within its walls. On rare, desperate occasions, it would rise in the silent darkness and march out into the night. This was the ultimate test of discipline, a move so fraught with danger it was reserved for moments when surprise was the only weapon left. Imagine the profound blackness of the ancient world. No electric lights, no moon on a cloudy night, just pitch darkness broken only by the faintest starlight. In that void, moving an army of thousands was an invitation to catastrophe. A single misstep could send a man tumbling into a ravine. A whispered command could carry to enemy sentries. The tight formations that defined the Roman day dissolved into a terrifying, amorphous mass where a soldier could not see the man in front of him. Cohesion was maintained not by sight, but by touch and the strictest imaginable silence. Men would literally hold onto the pack or cloak of the comrade ahead, forming a human chain stumbling forward into the unknown. Every piece of equipment was muffled. Metal fittings on shields and armor were wrapped in cloth. Hobnailed sandals, which normally rang on stone, were sometimes stuffed with grass or wool. The centurion's vine staffs used for signaling were replaced with gentle touches or the softest of whispers passed down the line. The usual trumpet calls were impossible. All communication was reduced to the most basic tactile level. The psychological strain was immense. Every rustle in the undergrowth could be an enemy patrol. Every distant animal cry could be a signal. The night march weaponized fear, but it weaponized it against both the enemy and the Legion itself. Its purpose was always shock, to appear where logic and Roman doctrine said an army could not be. The most famous example comes from the siege of Alesia. Julius Caesar, surrounded by a vast Gallic relief army while himself besieging the fortress of Vercingetorix, was caught in a double encirclement. His situation was desperate. To break the outer ring, he needed to launch a surprise attack from an unexpected direction. Under cover of darkness, he silently moved entire legions from one sector of his massive, double-walled fortifications to another. The Gauls, watching the Roman lines by day, had no idea the force facing them at dawn was not the tired garrison they observed the previous evening, but fresh, repositioned troops who had marched invisibly through the night. This clandestine shift was a critical factor in the brutal, final battle that broke the Gallic siege and decided the fate of Gaul. Night marches were also the tool of the trapped, a last-ditch effort to escape annihilation. A surrounded force might attempt to slip through enemy lines in the dark, abandoning its baggage and moving with agonizing slowness to avoid detection. Success meant survival and a chance to fight another day. Failure meant being caught strung out and helpless in the dark, a recipe for massacre. To navigate, the army relied on local guides who knew the terrain like their own hands, men whose loyalty was purchased at a high price and whose betrayal would mean doom. Sometimes on clear nights they could use the fixed stars for general direction, but in forests or uneven ground, they were utterly dependent on the man leading them. The payoff for this immense risk was a psychological blow that could shatter an enemy's will. To wake at dawn and find a Roman legion arrayed for battle on a plain it had no logical way of reaching was to feel the hand of a god or a demon at work. It broke the fundamental rules of warfare, creating a terror that mere numbers could not overcome. The night march was the exception that proved the rule of Roman discipline. It showed that even when stripped of its visual order, its trumpets, and its formations, the machine could still function on the sheer practiced trust between each soldier and the man beside him, moving as a single breathing shadow toward a single decisive point of light. The silent discipline of the night march was powered by a fuel as reliable as any road, the daily bread of the legionary. While the empire's reach was built on stone and steel, its endurance was forged from grain. The Roman soldier's diet was a masterpiece of logistical calculation, designed for one purpose: to convert wheat into miles. His primary ration, the fermentum, was not delivered as loaves of bread, but as whole grain, usually wheat or sometimes barley. Each man received a daily allowance of about 2 pounds. This was not a generous feast, it was a carefully measured fuel allotment, providing the calories needed to carry his load and march those 18 punishing miles. But raw grain is inedible. This meant every soldier, after a full day of marching and building a fortress, had one more critical duty: he had to become his own cook. The most common result was a simple porridge called poles. Using a small, portable hand mill, often shared among his 8-man tent group, the contubernium, a soldier would grind his daily portion of grain into coarse flour. This was then mixed with water, and sometimes a little salt or olive oil if available, and boiled in a bronze cooking pot over the group's shared fire. It was a bland, thick gruel, but it was hot, filling, and packed with energy. For days when there was no time to stop and cook, or during extended marches, the army provided bucellatum, a hardtack biscuit. This was flour, water, and salt baked rock hard to last for months without spoiling. It was nearly impossible to chew on its own, so soldiers would soak it in their pasca or stew to make it edible. This durable, compact food was the ultimate marching ration, allowing a legion to operate independently of supply trains for critical periods. Yet a man cannot march on porridge alone. The wheat ration was supplemented by other durable proteins. Each soldier also received a regular allowance of lauritum, cured bacon, or salt pork. This was not the thin strips we think of today, but a dense, heavily salted block of fat and meat, designed to last for weeks without refrigeration. A small chunk could be added to the poles for flavor and precious calories, or eaten on its own. Cheese, legumes like lentils or beans, and a little sour wine, the acidum used to make pasca, rounded out the official issue, known as the cibus castrensis, the camp food. But the official ration was just the baseline. A smart legionary supplemented his diet constantly. When the column halted near a wooded area, men would forage for nuts, berries, and edible greens. If they passed a village, they might trade for fresh vegetables, fruits, or eggs. Fishing and hunting, when possible, provided a welcome break from the monotony of hardtack and bacon. This system of self-sufficiency had a brilliant military logic. By issuing raw ingredients and requiring the soldiers to prepare their own meals in small groups, the army eliminated the need for a massive, vulnerable field kitchen. It distributed the risk. If one contubernium's food supply was lost or spoiled, it did not cripple the entire legion. The shared meal around the fire also reinforced the fundamental unit of the army, bonding the 8 men who slept, fought, and ate together into a family. Their survival depended on each other, from sharing the labor of grinding grain to standing watch while the poles bubbled over the flames. This relentless focus on practical calories reveals a stark truth. The legendary Roman march was not sustained by heroic spirit alone, but by a brutal, efficient metabolism. Every ounce of energy expended in digging a ditch or taking a step had to be replaced by an ounce of grain, a bite of salt pork, a sip of fortified vinegar. The general's battle plan began not with a map of enemy positions, but with a ledger of wheat shipments and a timetable for foraging. The soldier's body was a machine in the empire's service, and his diet was the precise grade of fuel required to keep the entire world-conquering apparatus moving forward, one grueling, well-fed step at a time. That constant metabolism of grain into miles began with a brutal transformation of the human body itself. Before a young recruit ever faced an enemy, he faced a more relentless opponent, the road. The Roman legion did not accept men, it manufactured soldiers through a calculated process of breaking and rebuilding, where the first and most vital lesson was not how to fight, but how to walk. The new arrival, the tyro, was a civilian in a military world. His soft hands and tender feet were useless. His first issue of equipment was not a gleaming sword, but the heavy marching pack, the sarcina, and a pair of thick-soled sandals, the cavalry. His training was mercilessly practical. Veteran centurions, men whose own legs were maps of scar tissue and hardened muscle, drove the Tyrians on practice marches that were exercises in controlled agony. They marched not on smooth parade grounds, but over every type of terrain the empire could offer: rocky hillsides, loose scree, muddy riverbanks, and dense thickets. The distances increased relentlessly from 5 miles to 10, then to the full standard march of 18 and beyond. They marched in every season, under the blistering sun and in driving rain, because war did not wait for good weather. The goal was not to teach a man to walk, but to rebuild him from the ground up, beginning with his feet. The cavalry, with their open design and heavy iron hobnails, were instruments of this transformation. At first, they ripped the tyro's soft feet to shreds, creating a lattice of blisters and raw skin, but through repeated, agonizing marches, the body adapted. The skin thickened into layers of protective callus as tough as leather. The muscles of the calves, thighs, and back strengthened to bear the unnatural load. The ankles grew stable from navigating uneven ground. This was not fitness, it was a physiological overhaul. The centurions watched for the weak, the complainers, those whose spirit broke before their feet hardened. They were driven harder or they were discarded. The empire had no room for men who could not keep pace. Alongside this physical trial ran a parallel conditioning of the mind. The tyro learned to maintain the military step while exhausted, to keep his place in the formation despite searing pain, to ignore the screaming protests of his own body and focus only on the back of the man in front of him. He learned that stopping was not an option, that the column would march on with or without him. This forged a psychological resilience as vital as physical strength, the ability to endure the mundane, repetitive torment of distance. The contrast between the struggling tyro and the finished product, the veteranus, was the entire point of the system. The veteran did not just march the 18 miles, he did it while mentally planning his share of the night's ditch digging. His callous feet, now as insensitive as the soles of his sandals, felt no discomfort from stones or rough ground. His muscles, long accustomed to the weight, operated with an efficient, automatic rhythm. Where the tyro saw an insurmountable hill, the veteran saw a predictable change in cadence. Where the tyro dreaded the final mile, the veteran was already calculating the best spot to pitch his tent within the soon-to-be-built camp. The veteran's endurance was so profound it seemed supernatural to new recruits. He could complete a forced march, help construct the ramparts, stand his watch, and still have the energy to carefully maintain his weapons and gear by firelight. This was not a matter of brute strength, but of perfected economy. Every movement was refined, every ounce of energy conserved, every piece of gear packed in the exact same way for instant access. The relentless training marches had rewired him, turning the colossal effort of campaigning into a simple, repeatable routine. The gulf between the two men was the measure of Rome's investment. The tyro was raw material, a cost. The veteranus was a finished asset, a walking repository of imperial discipline whose very body was a testament to the system's power. He was the living answer to the question of how an empire marches, a man who had been remade, step by brutal step, into a perfect component of the machine. That hardened veteran was more than a soldier, he was a mobile economic unit. The relentless forward motion of the legions did not end at the battlefield's edge, it rippled outward, transforming landscapes into assets and turning conquest into a self-funding enterprise. The true, often overlooked secret of the Roman march was its function as the world's most powerful tool for resource extraction. Every road built for the army became a commercial artery. Every frontier secured by a legion opened a new vein of wealth for the empire. The march was not merely a means of applying force, it was the primary engine of the imperial economy. Think of it this way, a legion on campaign was like a deep-sea mining vessel today. Its immediate purpose is to reach a specific location and perform a difficult technical task. But its lasting impact is the infrastructure it leaves behind and the raw materials it makes accessible. The Roman military was that vessel, and its daily marches laid the cables that powered Rome's colossal wealth. The most obvious resource was metal. When a legion secured a new territory, one of the first assessments made was geological. Prospectors, often attached to the army's engineering corps, would scour the hills for signs of ore. The conquest of Spain, for instance, was driven as much by its legendary silver mines as by any strategic need. Once a region like Dacia, rich in gold, was subdued, the legions did not leave. They built permanent fortresses and patrol roads to protect the mining operations that followed. Slave labor, often prisoners from the very wars of conquest, was put to work in horrific conditions, digging the precious metals that would be minted into the coins that paid the very legions guarding them. It was a grim, closed loop of conquest. The army created the security that allowed for the extraction that funded the army, but the economic engine ran on more than precious metals. The ultimate resource was agricultural, the grain tax. Rome's survival depended on feeding its million-strong population in the capital, a city that could not feed itself. The provinces, particularly fertile regions like Egypt, Sicily, and North Africa, were obligated to send vast annual shipments of grain as tax, the annona. This was not a suggestion, it was a demand enforced by the implicit threat of the legions, and here the military road network revealed its second, peaceful purpose. Those stone highways, built for the swift movement of troops, became the perfect conduits for the slow, grinding wagon trains of tax grain. A secure road meant predictable delivery. A guarded port established by the Navy meant safe loading onto grain ships. The entire logistical genius honed for moving armies was seamlessly applied to moving the harvests of an empire. A rebellion was not just a political challenge, it was an economic crisis, a blockage in the vital artery that fed Rome itself. So the legions would march not only to punish rebellion, but to reopen the flow of wheat. Their victory was measured not just in captives taken, but in granaries secured and shipping lanes reopened. This system created a powerful feedback loop of growth. A new road built for a campaign would, within a few years, be lined with the villas of retired veterans who had been granted land nearby. These settlements created local markets, demanded goods, and further stabilized the region. Traders, emboldened by the security of a Roman garrison and a well-maintained road, would venture further, bringing goods from the frontiers back to the heart of the empire. Amber from the Baltic, spices from the east, exotic animals from Africa. The army's demand for supplies from leather and cloth to iron nails and pottery stimulated local economies along its routes. A legionary spending his salary in a frontier town was injecting imperial currency into a local system, subtly binding that economy to Rome's. The march, therefore, was the initial spark. It was the violent, disciplined act that cleared the way for all the quieter, more persistent forms of control that followed: tax collectors, merchants, settlers, and laws. The thunder of marching feet was the sound of an economic frontier being pushed forward, mile by calculated mile, until the wealth of the known world all flowed down Roman roads toward a single hungry city on the Tiber. Those economic calculations left their mark not in ledgers but in the earth itself. The secrets of the Roman march are not just theories in a history book, they are physical truths waiting to be uncovered, footprints pressed into history. Modern archaeology has given us the power to see the legion on the move, not through the eyes of a historian, but through the eyes of the soldiers themselves. At places like Vindolanda, a fort along Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, rain and time have performed a miracle of preservation. In layers of ancient, waterlogged mud, archaeologists have found the actual footprints of Roman soldiers, frozen in time as the ground hardened around them. These are not vague impressions, but detailed casts of hobnailed sandals, the calligi, with the pattern of the iron nails clearly visible. Some prints are deep and heavy, suggesting a man laden with his full pack. Others show the scuff marks of a quick turn or a slip. In one poignant discovery, a set of small footprints, likely belonging to a child of a camp follower, was found alongside the soldier's tracks. These silent traces in the mud are a direct sensory link to the past. You are not reading about the march, you are standing where a legionary stood, seeing the very ground he compacted with his weight 2,000 years ago. From the ground we rise to the sky for another perspective. The perfect geometry of the Roman military mind is best seen from above. Across the landscapes of Britain and North Africa, Aerial photography and laser scanning have revealed ghostly outlines etched into fields and pastures. These are the remains of marching camps, their ditches and ramparts long since filled in, but still affecting the growth of crops and grass in subtle ways. From the air, the pattern is unmistakable, a perfect rectangle or square, with the straight lines of the internal streets and the precise corners of the gates clearly visible as faint discolorations in the soil. These spectral blueprints confirm the ancient accounts with stunning clarity. They show that the standard camp design was not an ideal, but a daily reality, built with such consistent precision that a soldier transferred from Egypt to Scotland would have known his exact place within its walls without being told. The scale is humbling, a temporary city for thousands, abandoned after a single night, leaving only a geometric scar on the land as its signature. Finally, the artifacts themselves whisper tales of the road. Excavations have recovered the very hobnails that fell from worn caliggi, littering Roman roads like metallic breadcrumbs. We have pieces of the leather tents, the papilio, with their stitching and reinforcement still intact, showing how a soldier's home was designed to be packed and carried. At Vindolanda, the waterlogged soil preserved even more fragile treasures, thin wooden writing tablets on which officers penned requests for supplies, lists of personnel, and even birthday party invitations. One famous tablet is a soldier's letter home, asking for more socks and underwear to cope with the brutal British cold. These objects collapse the centuries. A hobnail is not just a piece of iron, it is the sound of the march. A scrap of tent leather is not just animal hide, it is the smell of smoke and the feeling of shelter after a long day. A request for socks is not just a list, it is the voice of a tired man, far from home, enduring the same mundane hardships as any soldier throughout time. This is the reality behind the legend, a story written not in grand monuments, but in lost sandals, ghostly forts, and the simple human need for warm feet at the end of a 20-mile walk. The hobnails and ghostly forts are not just relics, they are blueprints. The principles forged on those ancient roads did not vanish with the empire. They marched forward through history, reshaping the very idea of what an army could be. The Roman Legionary established a template for the professional soldier, a model of discipline, endurance, and systematic support that every modern military still follows in spirit. Consider the core Roman innovation, the separation of the soldier from the civilian. Before Rome, armies were often seasonal militias. The legionary was a full-time professional, paid, trained, and equipped by the state. This concept of a standing army, a permanent instrument of national power, is the direct ancestor of every professional military force in the world today. His standardized kit, from his armor to his entrenching tool, finds its echo in the issued gear of a modern infantryman, each item vetted for utility and weight. The Roman military step, that calculated balance of speed and endurance, evolved into the modern route march with its own precise cadences and load-bearing standards designed to move troops vast distances while preserving fighting strength. But the deepest parallels lie in the unseen machinery of war. Napoleon Bonaparte, a student of history, famously devoured accounts of Roman campaigns. He understood that their genius was logistical. He sought to emulate their speed and strategic surprise, declaring that an army marches on its stomach. This was not a new observation, it was a Roman doctrine rediscovered. Napoleon's use of corps operating independently yet supporting a central objective, his reliance on foraging combined with ambitious supply trains, and his drive for rapid concentration on the battlefield were all refinements of the Roman playbook. The Agmen Quadratum, that fortified marching square, finds its conceptual descendant in modern combined arms tactics, where infantry, armor, and support elements move in mutually protective formations. The Roman scout network, the Explorators, is the progenitor of today's reconnaissance patrols and satellite surveillance, all seeking the same goal: to lift the fog of war. Even the nightly castra has its parallel in the modern defensive perimeter, the hastily dug fighting positions and coordinated fields of fire that turn any patch of ground into a bastion. Yet beyond the tangible tactics, the most enduring legacy is psychological. The Romans mastered the calculus of morale. They understood that discipline was not merely about punishment, but about predictability and purpose. The daily ritual of the march and the camp provided a crushing routine, but also a profound sense of order and security. This cultivation of esprit de corps, of unit identity symbolized by the standard, is the bedrock of military tradition from the sergeant squad to the regimental colors. The Roman system proved that an army's true weapon is its cohesion, the unbreakable trust that allows men to function as a single entity under unbearable stress. That lesson, written in the sweat and resolve of legionaries 2,000 years ago, remains the first and last commandment of armies everywhere. The roads may now be asphalt, the loads carried in engines rather than on backs, but the essential equation remains. Victory belongs not simply to the brave, but to those who can move the fastest, endure the longest, and arrive ready to fight as one. But what did that endurance actually look like up close? Hollywood has painted a picture of Roman legions that is often more fantasy than fact. We see columns of men sprinting in perfect formation under the blazing sun, their polished armor gleaming, never breaking a sweat. This is a powerful image, but it is a dangerous distortion of the truth. The reality of the Roman march was far less glamorous and infinitely more human. First, let us dismantle the most persistent myth, the idea of the constant dead run. No army, no matter how disciplined, could sustain a full sprint for 20 miles while carrying half their body weight in gear. The military step was exactly that, a fast, efficient walk. It was a pace designed for distance, not for dramatic charge. Think of it as the difference between a marathon runner's steady, ground-eating stride and a sprinter's explosive burst. The legion saved its running for the battlefield itself, for closing the final gap with the enemy. The march was about relentless, sustainable momentum, not unsustainable speed. Another cinematic favorite is the legionary perpetually clad in his full segmented plate armor. In reality, that heavy lorica segmentata was precious battle gear, not hiking attire. On the march, it was carefully packed away with the baggage train or carried on the mules. A soldier would typically wear a simpler, lighter tunic and his military cloak. The iconic helmet, often slung from his belt or pack, donning the full panoply, was reserved for when the scouts signaled imminent contact. This was a practical necessity. Marching for hours in the Mediterranean heat under 40 pounds of metal would have caused heatstroke and collapse long before any enemy was sighted. The Romans were masters of energy conservation, and that meant carrying their armor, not wearing it until the moment it was needed. So what was the true, unvarnished experience? It was a world of pain and mundane misery. Before a recruit's feet became leathery pads, they were a mess of agonizing blisters. The coarse wool of the tunic chafed against sweat-soaked skin. Shoulders grew raw from the constant rub of the fur capole. Fatigue was not a possibility, it was a guarantee. Men marched in a state of exhausted trance, their minds focused only on the back of the comrade in front of them, the rhythm of the step a hypnotic drumbeat against the pain. And yes, men did break. Desertion was a constant concern for commanders, not out of cowardice, but often out of sheer, unbearable exhaustion or despair. The centurion's vine staff was not just a symbol of rank, it was a tool for prodding laggards and administering immediate, brutal correction to those whose spirit or body failed. The march was a filter, and it ruthlessly weeded out the weak. This stands in stark contrast to the chaotic hordes often shown in films. There was no shouting, no disarray. The Hollywood barbarian charge is pure fiction when applied to Rome. The legion's power was its silence, its order, its eerie quiet, punctuated only by the tramp of feet and the occasional bark of a command. It moved not as a mob, but as a single organism with 1,000 eyes and one will. The security was absolute, the scouting relentless, the formation constantly adaptable. They did not blunder into ambushes, they methodically nullified them through preparation. The grueling reality was not one of constant heroic exertion, but of systematic, grinding pressure. It was a balance between moving fast enough to surprise an enemy, but not so fast that the army arrived broken, between carrying enough to be self-sufficient, but not so much that movement became impossible, between pushing men to their absolute limit, but not so far that the legion shattered from within. This was the genuine secret, not superhuman strength, but a profound, calculated understanding of human limits, and a ruthless system designed to operate right at the very edge of them. So we have seen the grueling reality behind the legend, a system built not on myth but on a cold, brilliant understanding of limits. The secret of the Roman march was never a single weapon or tactic, but the flawless integration of 5 interlocking systems, each one a marvel of practical genius. First, the engineered road network, those stone arteries that conquer geography itself, turning mud and distance into a predictable grid of time. Second, the soldiers' meticulously calculated load, transforming each man into a self-sufficient fortress who carried the tools to build, eat, and fight anywhere on earth. Third, the nightly ritual of the marching camp, a fortified town erected before dusk, providing security and psychological stability in the heart of hostile territory. Fourth, the vast and ruthless logistics, from the foraging parties and supply trains to the control of seas and rivers, that solved the endless equation of feeding thousands of men on the move. And finally, the relentless, brutal discipline, forged through training that broke and rebuilt the human body, creating a soldier whose endurance seemed supernatural. Alone, any one of these elements was impressive. Combined, they created a synergy of force that was unprecedented in the ancient world. The road enabled the load. The load built the camp secured the logistics, and the discipline made it all possible, day after punishing day. This was the machine that could project power from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sands of Syria, from the Atlantic coast to the banks of the Euphrates. It moved not with the chaotic fury of a barbarian horde, but with the terrifying, silent precision of an industrial process. Conquest became a matter of logistics, will, and relentless forward motion. Picture, if you will, a single Roman road at the empire's edge, its stone surface fading into the wilderness. It points toward a horizon the legion has not yet reached, but inevitably will. That road is more than a path, it is a symbol of the march that built an empire. It represents the will to impose order on chaos, to connect the distant to the center, and to move with a purpose so determined it reshaped the world. Which of these secrets, from the soldier's impossible burden to the silent language of the trumpets, amazed you the most? Let us know in the comments below.